And now, stand-up community subscribers and listeners from around the globe, it's time to Stand Up with Pete Dominic, where we ask the important questions that impact you, your family, and your community. Such as, can vertigo-induced vomiting while driving be used as an act of road rage? And with the horrific images in Ukraine now being seen throughout the free world, will NATO become involved to stop the Russian invasion? And also, puberty. And now, the podcast host who won't stand for any sort of unwanted invasion into his prized garden patch, Pete Dominic.
That's right, Pico, and I have double fencing, folks. You're not going to get through this year. No siree. Wait, what's that? A groundhog? I've got to go. Hello, folks. Welcome to today's episode of Stand Up, where each and every day I'll talk to two experts and do a comprehensive news recap on the day before, have a little fun throughout, and learn along with you. Thank you for joining me on this journey. I am so happy to have you listening and your support if you are a subscriber. And since this is the first week of the year, I want to remind those of you who are subscribers to make sure that your credit card is active, because you get billed to support the show, and a lot of people's credit cards expire, and all of a sudden subscriptions go away, and then people wonder why they're not getting the email that you're supposed to get every day. So just make sure that hasn't happened. And thank you very much for supporting the show. StandUpWithPete.com if you haven't already. I've got an awesome couple of guests joining me. Dr. Christina Greer of Fordham University joins me for a wide-ranging conversation. Always great to catch up with her. And for the first time on the podcast, a regular on the old show, he is the director of Public Citizens, which is a public interest nonprofit organization. He's the director of their energy program. Tyson Slocum joins me today. Chrissy Greer, Tyson Slocum, and most importantly, I've got you listening and along for the journey. Let's see what's going on in the world. Let's check in on yesterday's news up until the time I hit record on the podcast tonight. It's time for the last 24. All right, let's start out in front of President Biden's helicopter, Marine One, where yesterday he made these comments, which drove a lot of the day's news.
You may remember I got criticized for calling Putin a war criminal. Well, the truth of the matter is so what happened in Bucha. This warrants him. He is a war criminal. But we have to gather the information. We have to continue to provide Ukraine with the weapons they need to continue the fight, and we have to gather all the detail so this can be have a war crime trial. This guy is brutal, and what's happening in Bucha is outrageous, and everyone's seen it.
Genocide?
No, I think it is a war crime.
What are you going to do about it, sir? Are you going to do more sanctions on Russia?
I'm seeking more sanctions, yes. I'll have time to announce that to you.
Okay, but what does that all mean? What does it mean that the President of the United States or the leader of one country is calling the leader of another country a war criminal? And how do you define a genocide? You heard him asked about that. Well, let's head over to Chris Hayes, who had a great guest on to talk about it. He's a professor of practice of law at Vanderbilt, but he's the former ambassador at large for war crimes issues in the U.S. State Department. Guy who understands the legal and political implications of what it means to be a war criminal or be called a war criminal. Professor Michael Newton on MSNBC last night.
Well, it's vitally important. And I've been working for a long time with courageous Ukrainian human rights defenders on the ground. This is not new. Russians have been violating the law of occupation for a long time in Crimea and other parts of Ukraine. And now you're just seeing, I liked your word, the brutality of what they really do on the ground. But that's a far cry from building a cohesive criminal case. And which is a composite. This is the common heritage of mankind, and we have to work together with all countries, with all comers, to develop a comprehensive body of evidence that can be used in any court in the world.
All right. Well, I thought that was a pretty good perspective and definition, and maybe I should have some kind of human rights war crimes experts on the show to help us understand exactly what this means and what this means in terms of an escalation as well. All right, well, that didn't stop certain Trump supporters from still preferring Vladimir Putin over Joe Biden. Yeah, comedian Jason Selvig of the good liars. These guys go out and talk to Trump supporters in the field at rallies. Well, they were in Michigan over the weekend at one of Donald Trump's rallies, and he captured one woman who said, yep, just that. She wants Vladimir Putin to be president over Joe Biden. And now I'm going to make you listen to her say it.
Who would you rather have president, Joe Biden or Vladimir Putin?
Oh, Putin. Definitely.
And why is that?
I believe he's been given a tough... Since World War II, Russia's been the bad guy, when in actuality the Nazis left Germany and they ended up going to the Ukraine, coming in here. George Bush was actually, thank you, George Bush was actually a Nazi.
What? Oh my God. Okay, well, I guess we've all got different definitions of Nazi, and well, there you go. Really feels like somebody punched me in the ears and about the neck and head quite a bit. Here is National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan saying that information from these mass killings in Bucha, Ukraine, appears to show further evidence of war crimes. Let's head back to the White House. Then back to reality here on Earth One.
We had already concluded that Russia committed war crimes in Ukraine, and the information from Bucha appears to show further evidence of war crimes. And as the president said, we will work with the world to ensure there is full accountability for these crimes. We are also working intensively with our European allies on further sanctions to raise the pressure and raise the cost on Putin and on Russia.
Okay, well, there you go. That is the Ukraine sound, the Putin's invasion-related sound that I've got for you. And let's stay at the White House. Check in with Jen Psaki, who apparently is leaving for MSNBC. She just got over COVID, and the news leaked that apparently she's negotiated a deal, or she was up for like a bidding war between CNN and MSNBC. Obviously, she'll be great on those networks, and I'm a big fan of what she's done at the White House, but I'm uncomfortable with the revolving door between government and media, much less government and private industry. And I wish there were a way to create a buffer, a window, some time before they go right out of the White House onto television. I don't like that. I don't think it's a good idea. I don't think it's a good standard to set. And at the same time, she's going to be very effective over there at MSNBC as well. Anyway, here she is sparring with her arch rival, except for the fact that there's really no match. But he stays there and does the job. It's Fox's Peter Doocy. He asked about the Don't Say Gay bill in Florida and questioned what age and gender sexual identity discussion is appropriate.
Does the White House think that students should be taught about sexual orientation and gender identity?
Well, I would say, first of all, Peter, we have spoken to the Don't Say Gay bill in the past, I believe is what you're referring to, and made clear that as we look at this law, what we think it's a reflection of is politicians in Florida propagating misinformed, hateful policies that do absolutely nothing to address the real issues. The Department of Education is well positioned and ready to evaluate what to do next, and its implementation, whether its implementation violates federal civil rights law. But I would note that parents across the country are looking to, national, state, and district leaders to support our nation's students, to ensure that kids are treated equally in schools, and that is certainly not. This is not a reflection of that.
All right, a little bit more from the back and forth with Doocy, Psaki, and this is where he gets his ass handed to him because he's just making shit up to create a conflict. And I think this is an important way to answer this terrible question.
So just the last one. So if you guys oppose this law that bans classroom instruction about sexual orientation and gender identity in K through 3, does the White House support that kind of classroom instruction before kindergarten? Do
you have examples of schools in Florida that are teaching kindergartners about sex education?
I'm just asking for the president's opinion.
I think that's a relevant question because I think this is a politically charged, harsh law that is putting parents and LGBTQ plus kids in a very difficult, a heartbreaking circumstance. And so I actually think that's a pretty relevant question. Go ahead.
Well, then I guess we're done with Doocy. Well, other mayors and governors and others are trying to kind of leverage this and reach out to the LGBT community, including New York City Mayor Eric Adams, who called the Don't Say Gay bill, quote, political showmanship and then pitched to the Florida LGBTQ community. He said, hey, listen, come to New York. And then they were all like, we all live there. And that's why we moved to Florida. Sorry. No, I'm kidding. Here's Eric Adams.
That's what this movement of Don't Say Gay is about. This political showmanship of attempting to demonize a particular group or community is unacceptable. And we are going to loudly show our support and say to those who are living in Florida, listen, we want you here in New York. You know, we want you right here in New York City. And it's more than just saying that. It's also standing up and aligning ourselves with the men and women of the LGBTQ plus community and stating that we are in unison with you and your right to have self-identification, your right to live the lifestyle and live the lives that you choose to live without any form of harassment.
It would seem that people who identify as Floridians and also members of the LGBT community had a lot of reactions that, like, we can't afford New York. We can barely afford Florida because New Yorkers keep moving here. And another factoid, Eric Adams' police reform group, 100 blacks in law enforcement, marched in the New York City Gay Pride Parade in the early 90s in full NYPD uniform. So apparently he's always been an ally to the LGBT community. All right, and now let's move on to one more issue. I've got some sound related to the bipartisan vote of 53 to 47 that the Senate forced the nomination of Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson out of the Senate Judiciary Committee yesterday, putting the judge on track for final confirmation by week's end. Senators Lisa Murkowski, Mitt Romney, and Susan Collins are the three Republicans who voted with Democrats. All three Republicans also will support Jackson when it comes to a time to vote on the final confirmation. Here is Senator Chuck Schumer forcing the vote out of the deadlocked Judiciary Committee, where the vote, by the way, was deadlocked, evenly split 11-11 at the Judiciary Committee itself. So procedurally, the shoe man, Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, had to come in, step in, and force it out. Here he is doing it.
I move to discharge the Judiciary Committee from further consideration of Ketanji Brown Jackson of the District of Columbia to be an Associate Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States.
All right, there you go. So it's happening. And then, of course, there was an ugly and fierce debate between Republicans and Democrats on the committee. Here's a bit of a mashup edited together by ABC News.
Judge Jackson may be a fine woman, but she has built her career as a far-left activist.
Judge Jackson is not far from the mainstream.
Based on her policy and her philosophy. And I think on these core issues, she is just dead wrong. How qualified do you have to be, double Harvard? How qualified do you have to be clerking at all levels of the federal judiciary? How qualified do you have to be 3 times confirmed by the Senate in a bipartisan manner?
Joe Biden's chief of staff, Ron Klain, seemed to be confident about the nominee.
She will get enough votes to get confirmed.
But let's go a little bit further in depth. Let's start with the ugliest of words and senators. This is 35 seconds of junior senator and man hated by his entire family and everybody who's ever met him, Ted Cruz, warning that Judge Jackson is confirmed. She will be extreme and far left, the furthest ever to serve on the Supreme Court. Bullshit.
Not a single Republican senator asked her about her high school yearbook, engaged in the kind of personal slanders that Democrats have made a business about. If the questions were hard, it is because her record is at the extreme.
What a cartoon villain this asshole is.
There have been 115 men and women who have served on the Supreme Court. If Judge Jackson is confirmed, I believe she will prove to be the most extreme and the furthest left justice ever to serve on the United States Supreme Court.
I'm not even sure it's worth mentioning how within the mainstream she is, how non-political she really is. When you think about the Republicans, the conservatives, the originalists on the court, from Scalia to currently Clarence Thomas and Alito, I mean, they are so far to the right. In fact, Clarence Thomas's own wife is a conspiracy theorist which has become mainstream for about a quarter of people who identify as Republicans. It would be like suggesting that Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson's husband is somehow an Antifa, which isn't even a great comparison because Antifa are not conspiracy theorists. They're ideologues and activists. It's just wild to even hear him frame it that way. Anyway, here is Senator Chuck Schumer again pushing back on these accusations and ridiculously inaccurate and farcical criticisms of Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson.
It's obvious listening to Republicans that their objections are entirely unserious. Many who label Judge Jackson as radical and far left today conveniently ignore that she received bipartisan support not once, not twice, but 3 times in this chamber, including by voice vote. They also fail to mention that Judge Jackson commands strong support from across the political spectrum, from conservative judges to the nation's largest police unions to a long list of former colleagues who say she is nothing short of the best of the best. Republicans in committee have ignored, in other words, the plain facts of Judge Jackson's record, and that is deeply disappointing. Judge Jackson is a brilliant and a historic nominee, and her elevation as the first black woman to the U.S. Supreme Court should bring the Senate together.
And now let's listen to Senator from South Carolina, a man who, if you look down from above him, you can see that he's actually a hollow being. There's nothing inside him. He is a completely empty barrel. Lindsey Graham.
If we get back the Senate and we're in charge of this body and there's judicial openings, we will talk to our colleagues on the other side. But if we're in charge, she would not have been before this committee. You would have had somebody more moderate than this. So I want you to know right now, the process you started to go to a simple majority vote is going to rear its head here pretty soon, where we're in charge. Then we'll talk about judges differently.
Senator Graham went on to say, and if we get the Senate back, we're going to make all kinds of changes. I'm going to redecorate this entire room, and the only judges we'll be nominating will actually be disciples of Christ. Oh, you will see. You will see. Does anybody have a ham hock and a Diet Dr. Pepper? All right, we'll get a little bit more. One more senator, a little bit more from Cory Booker. We heard just a little bit of him. But here he is slamming Senator Josh Hawley for hypocritically saying that he supports child abuse sentencing guidelines while attacking Judge Jackson.
A senator just said, I believe the guidelines are right. Well, obviously, Republican-appointed judges don't agree with him, because the norm in many states is 70 to 80% of judges going before the guideline. And if that statement is correct, then why didn't you vote against every one of those Republican judges that was not following the guidelines, as most don't? You could try to create a straw man here, but it does not hold. And it's just frustrating to me to listen to people trying to create a caricature of a human being whose family is law enforcement, who is a parent, and who is well within the norm on these cases.
All right, that's all the sound I've got for you on that. And with a 2-week Easter in sight for senators, Democrats are hoping for a final vote before this weekend. If you're listening here on April 5th, if confirmed, Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson would be the first black woman on the Supreme Court, and that is a big effing deal. All right, one piece of sound on this big news item that broke yesterday. The world's richest man disclosed a 9.2% stake in Twitter after criticizing the platform's free speech policies. Elon Musk announcing he is the largest shareholder in the company. Here's CNBC's Andrew Ross Sorkin breaking it down in under a minute or so.
Elon Musk announces, I wouldn't say he announces, discloses this morning that he's taken a 9.2% stake in Twitter. This is technically what's called a passive stake at the moment, but I don't think Elon Musk does anything in a passive way. I think this is the beginning of something bigger. And the question is, what is he doing and why is he doing it? Over the past couple of weeks, he puts polls out on Twitter saying, do you think that Twitter should be open source? Do you think it should be more free speech? He has, I would say, a libertarian streak, a more sort of laissez-faire approach to this. Yes. He would like to do social media the way, frankly, this new Trump truth effort would be. By the way, that stock for Trump's stock falling today because here is Elon Musk maybe trying to do the same thing.
Oh, and on that last point, how about this? 2 top executives at former disgraced President Trump's social media site called Truth Social. I'll say it now because it's crashing and burning. I didn't want to mention it when he launched. I didn't want to promote it at all. But 2 executives have now left the company because everything Trump starts and touches dies. Here's ABC News reporting on it yesterday.
Executives are quitting Truth Social, the social media platform founded by former President Donald Trump. Reuters reports the company's chief of technology and head of product development have both left their posts. Stocks plunged today after that news broke. The site launched in February, but has struggled with technical difficulties with hundreds of thousands of prospective users stuck on a waiting list. Truth Social markets itself as an alternative to major platforms like Twitter and Facebook, both of which removed Trump for allegedly inciting violence during the January 6th Capitol riot.
Well, there you go. Truth Social is going the way of Trump steaks and water and his presidency and pretty much everything else. It's dying slowly or really fast. All right, there's another really big story that I want to just play a clip from. This is about the Staten Island Amazon employees, workers, who formed the company's first labor union on Friday. It is a huge deal. All the important folks who I trust and write about economics and the labor movement are saying that, at least as far as I can tell. I'll be talking with Stephen Greenhouse. I'm scheduled to, at least, on tomorrow's show. He has covered labor for the New York Times, has a great piece about it at Slate. But here is Christian Smalls telling the story of, and everybody needs to follow, at Amazon Labor, how they overcame the union-busting campaign waged by the multi-billion-dollar company. I guess they spent over $4 million trying to bust this union effort because they saw what floodgates it might open with workers' rights. Here he is, Christian Smalls, on Democracy Now!
11 months ago, grassroots worker-led movement, just Amazon workers, former, current, like myself, just trying to do the right thing. Once again, no resources, no major backing. Just a bunch of ordinary people just coming together from all over the country. We had different people flying in to help us out. Some of the comrades that I traveled the country with, advocating with. And 11 months ago, we started something that we really didn't know what we were getting ourselves into. But we just knew that it was working for us. We were consistently talking to our workers every single day. Me, unfortunately, not being able to go inside the building. It was just a combination of me and Derek on the inside-outside game. Me at the bus stop, connecting with workers, earning the trust, building relationships. Derek actually inside the building, talking to workers every day in his department, taking over his old department. Things like that help us get us to this point. And I'm just ecstatic and excited to, be the interim president and lead us to this victory. It's wonderful to see. And I'm happy to just once again share this experience with the entire world.
All right, that is a big, big deal for sure. And that is also all of the sound that I've got for you on the last 24 hours of news. But there's so much more that I don't have as much context for. A whole bunch more headlines, all in a clump. Oh, yes, that's right. It's time for the news dump. And today's news dump jingle, written and performed, as it almost always is, by the great Pete Coe. This is about hawks that were protecting nestlings from predators, dive-bombing people entering a high school.
Humans walking close to nests, hawks have had enough. The kids all run for cover on today's news dump.
Oh, I was sure there was going to be a kid running for cover. Sound effect, Pete. Well done as always, my friend. And let's see, what are the headlines that I've got for you here? I already mentioned Elon Musk has become the largest stakeholder in Twitter. What does that mean real quick? With $73.5 million share purchase. Of course, Elon Musk has 80 million Twitter followers, very active on the site, and he is someone who has questioned free speech on Twitter and whether the platform is undermining democracy. So a lot of folks, as you heard, speculating about what his goals and priorities are with Twitter. I guess he's going to tell us, probably on Twitter. Or not, he's just trying to get attention and make a smart investment and make us feel unsafe. Well, Speaking of feeling unsafe, the World Health Organization now says 99% of the world's population breathes poor quality air. The UN Health Agency said nearly everybody in the world breathes air that doesn't meet its standards for air quality, drawing on information from a growing number of cities, towns, and villages across the globe, now over 6,000 municipalities. Well, maybe Elon Musk can help with that at least. You know, because he's got solar panels and electric cars and stuff. All right, let's see. The Grammys, the Grammy Awards, I guess they were Sunday night, right? They matched last year's low with 8.9 million tuning in on CBS and Paramount Plus. Who's watching these reality shows? I guess maybe that one, the Grammys are a little better than the Oscars because they have musical performances, right? Didn't Louis C.K. win Best Comedy Album? I know a lot of people, including myself, pretty outraged by that. Specifically because there are other comedians who did albums that were nominated. All right, moving on. As the U.S. is now nearing 1 million COVID deaths, I mean, we've probably surpassed that, but in terms of ones that have been tracked, an almost incomprehensible number of lives lost, as few thought possible when the pandemic began. New data also saying that people in poor counties died from COVID at nearly twice the rate of richer ones. And we're going to continue to hear depressing and terrible headlines like that coming out as more information comes out, including this. For Americans with diabetes, the pandemic has been especially deadly. Those with the disease, which is 34 million Americans, or 13% of all adults, especially at risk of severe COVID because diabetes impairs the immune system, and many others have underlying conditions. But after older people, elderly folks, and nursing home residents, perhaps no group has been hit harder by the coronavirus. Recent studies suggesting 30 to 40% of all COVID deaths in the U.S. have occurred among people with diabetes. A building near the deadly Surfside condo collapse has been ordered evacuated. You know, down there at Miami Beach now, an apartment complex near the one that collapsed has been evacuated after engineers determined the structure was not safe, which is terrifying news if you live in a building in that area and that has somehow flouted building regulations. Really scary. And while I'm scaring you and myself, a new library study is finding that challenged books soared in 2021. Accounts of book bannings and attempted book bannings, along with threats against librarians, has soared over the past year, according to the American Library Association's Office for Intellectual Freedom, which has never been so busy. Authoritarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban has won, has he? Is it, quote, won a fourth term as Hungary's leader. Serbia re-elected their president, Aleksandar Vučić, in a landslide. And Honduras seized the assets of their ex-president, Juan Orlando Hernandez, who is now facing U.S. drug charges. There's a suspect in the shooting in Sacramento that left 6 dead and 12 injured. Protesters blocked the transfer of 100,000 tons of Russian oil off the Danish coast, which is really interesting. And finally today, I haven't been able to get Ava to come out to the shed to do good news, but I'll keep trying each and every day because people love it. Actually, somebody went up to her at work where she's a hostess at a local restaurant and told her that he loved her news segments. I'm not sure who that is, so I'd love to meet you. But this is the good news story I've got for you. Footage of Prince, one of the most famous, respected singer-songwriters, icon of the world. Old footage of Prince at 11 years old supporting a public school teachers on strike has been found by a television station in Minneapolis. Staffers were combing through the station's archives for old clips when a local teachers strike in 1970 to include in a piece about a more recent strike when they spotted a familiar face in one of the clips. And the young boy says he was in favor of the strike. He was there picketing, saying, I think they should get some more money because they work extra hours for us and all that stuff and more. So you can check that out at WCCO, Minnesota. And I think that's a fun story to end the news dump on. Okay, well, now it's time to get to my first of two great guests on today's episode of Stand Up. Coming up, Dr. Christina Greer, political science professor over at Fordham University, author and writer and historian and naturalist. The great Chrissy Greer joins me. We had a great conversation, almost an hour long. Oh, and by the way, this music you're hearing, I call this the transition. That's how I have it labeled, transition music. But specifically, this is from listener Patrick Wilson, who sent this to me, a link to it. He says he's been listening for 15 years, and the show is what keeps him sane these days. He said he wrote, performed, and produced this song about 12 hours one day, and he wanted to share it with me. He wasn't asking for any promotion or anything, but I really like this, and I think I'm going to use this as my transition music. And I'll link to his SoundCloud account in the show notes, but this is called Persevere by Audible, Oughtable. Patrick Wilson, thank you very much for the music. I hope you don't mind me using it. And now let's get to my first guest. I've got Public Citizen's energy expert. It's Tyson Slocum, who used to join me on the old show all the time, and I just haven't been talking enough about energy and climate. He's the director of Public Citizen's energy program. He covers the regulation of petroleum, natural gas, and power markets. He's testified in front of Congress many times, appears regularly in media, also teaches at University of Maryland. He's an expert in issues dealing with regulation, deregulation of energy markets, and there's just so much to talk about with Tyson Slocum. Shout out to listener Max Langlois. Am I saying your name right, Max? Who emailed me and said I didn't push back hard enough on David Frum's points about renewable energy and that he wasn't quite accurate about where we're at. And I said, you know what, as a result, I've been meaning to reach out to Tyson anyway for a billion reasons. We had a great conversation, Tyson and I, and Public Citizen is a very important organization, which I hope that you will support. Please let Tyson know that you heard him here on the show. It's at Tyson Slocum, Slocum. Ladies and gentlemen, let's do it. All right, there he is. I just told you all about him and this amazing organization that I've always supported, Public Citizen, citizen.org, the great Tyson Slocum. So good to see you. So happy I get to talk to you today. Thank you very much for joining me.
Oh, Pete, it's absolutely my pleasure. Great to see you as well.
You are continuing. You've always done great work throughout your career. You're continuing to do great work throughout the Trump administration, into the Biden administration, into where we are with the climate crisis, and now with a war, and there's just so much to talk about. So I wanted to try to get a kind of a broad overview, your view, Public Citizen's view of the renewable energies market and kind of where we're at. We talk a lot about the climate crisis and the science and where we're at that, and feel free to include any of that. But where are we as a country, or really, as a planet? So I just wanted to ask you, where's the renewable energy market? I know it's different state to state, but where do we start by trying to understand where we're at, Tyson?
I mean, first, we're still digging out from the hole that Trump left us in, right? So Trump rolled back a whole slew of regulations to try and address climate change and promote clean energy. So it's going to take a couple of years to get over the Trump trauma. But that said, markets and a lot of state initiatives, along with a fairly generous federal production tax credit, leaves the renewable energy and clean energy sector in a huge state of growth and opportunity. And so we're seeing big initiatives across the country to promote more renewables. We're starting to see states like New Jersey and others initiate significant offshore wind development. We're seeing greater deployment of photovoltaic solar and rooftop solar. There are bumps along the way. There are some setbacks in a handful of states, but in general, the renewable energy industry continues to grow. It's not growing fast enough to replace fossil fuels, to reduce greenhouse gas emissions at the rate that science tells us to. For that, we need aggressive federal policy, and that's where things have stalled. But there's progress. There's a lot of work to be done. But right now, the prognosis for the renewable energy sector is very good. They've got some supply chain issues like every manufacturing sector has. So there's been some slight price increases. But on the whole, renewable energy continues to be the lowest cost energy resource in almost every U.S. market. And that's what's so remarkable And that's really the story of the renewable energy era that we're in, is that we're not talking about doing this stuff because it's the moral thing to do.
Right.
We're deploying renewables because it's the economic thing to do. It is the least cost resource compared to coal and natural gas. So it's doing well, but it needs to be doing better. And we need a coherent federal strategy. And that's where Joe Manchin and Congress continue to impede progress.
Because you mentioned Voldemort, what, how much would you say he, and I guess Kirsten Sinema doesn't get enough blame, but specifically, obviously, we talk more about him because of his own personal investment in dirty energy and coal in West Virginia, and obviously his state. But how much are they standing in the way? Because it would seem that obviously passed out of the House, you can get a lot of things done in this Democratic House in terms of energy, renewable energy incentives, fighting the climate crisis. But it's the Senate and the filibuster. Like, what would you say if they weren't standing in the way, if they did vote for this? How critical is the filibuster, or specifically their votes? Because even with their votes.
Yeah, we just need a majority. So right now it's 1 and 2 senators that are blocking progress. And Joe Manchin is important, not just for the reasons you mentioned, but also he's the chairman of the Senate Energy Committee. And so all paths lead through him. And he has been, objecting and stopping progress on this. So again, we need federal action in terms of regulating greenhouse gas emissions over the energy sector. We need a coherent regulatory path forward because, the electricity industry and energy in general has very long capital lead times. You've got to make big capital investments that take years to pay off. You've got to site transmission lines. You've got to site generation facilities. And all of that takes money and time. And without a coherent federal policy, it's just not going to get done in the time frame that we need it. And so, we had an infrastructure bill that passed last year that does a lot of very good things, allocates some money for infrastructure investment, and that's good. But the so-called Build Back Better Act, which was really designed as just a giant spending bill, that's what's been languishing. And without that additional effort and without clarity on how the federal government's going to be regulating greenhouse gas emissions, we're not going to get to where we need to be in terms of transitioning to a clean energy economy, Pete.
Where are we now in terms of the issue of storage? We can talk about renewable energy and all the different sources of renewable energy that are available and what's most efficient and what's most competitive and so on. And I would love to talk with you about that for hours. But in terms of the argument that's been made for years and was made right here in a conversation with me by David Frum, who is otherwise, I think, really an intelligent guy these days on politics, that's for sure, and on Trump, that's for sure. But that there's not enough wind and the sun doesn't always shine, the wind doesn't always blow. And even if it did, we don't have the storage technology yet. Where are we on the technology and that argument that we have heard for a long, long time?
Yeah, first of all, we're deploying thousands and thousands of megawatts of storage. It's being built into a number of state initiatives like New York and California. And so we're seeing more and more storage deployment. And it is important because it's true that renewable energy is intermittent, meaning that the wind doesn't blow on a constant basis. The sun obviously has challenges when it goes down at night. But the fact of the matter is that with energy storage, renewable energy is still going to be the cheapest form of energy. We've had requests for proposals by utilities across the country where they're like, we need the cheapest way to add 500 megawatts of energy resources, and large scale wind partnered with storage consistently comes in as the lowest cost bid. And so again, the markets have shown us that the revolution in clean energy technology continues to drop costs, make it more affordable and more efficient in its operations. And so we're only going to continue to see improvements in energy storage as different companies are tinkering with alternatives to lithium ion batteries, which are the primary way to store energy now, from our phones to large scale battery systems on the utility scale. So there just continues to be incredible opportunity here. Again, the challenge is getting it in every part of the country, because you've got some states that are refusing to open their markets to these technologies. They're listening to their incumbent vertically integrated utilities that are like, well, I'm not in the renewable energy or storage business, and we're not going to change. And so we need you to erect walls to keep out these technologies. And so that's always the case, right? With transformative, disruptive technologies, Pete, is you've got these disruptions that are occurring that are driving down cost, and the incumbent industries have a choice to make. You embrace these new disruptive technologies, incorporate them into your business model, or you use your decades of accumulated political and economic capital to erect artificial political barriers to their entry. So that's just the constant fight that we're having, and we're seeing it play out across the country.
Yeah, be like Blockbuster Video somehow convincing people and incentivizing or making it cost so much more to stream that we still had to go to a brick and mortar store and get a VHS tape. I mean, that's what coal is to me. It's phased. It should be phased out because
it's Betamax. Absolutely.
Yeah, coal is Betamax. But one specific state I did just want to ask you about. I don't know how closely you've been following state to state, but I just get so upset about the Sunshine State of Florida, their Republican-led legislature, their sociopath of a governor, with all due respect. But with the fact that they are now, I read, it's an interesting, and it's nuanced, but their legislature has somehow come to an agreement and signed legislation that is going to sunset the sun. The incentives for solar, rooftop solar in Florida are being phased out. And we can talk about the Florida Power and Light being similar to some of these other legacy energy companies and obviously lobbying state legislatures. I mean, it helped me understand, if Florida can't do it, then where's the future of other states which are more conservative and I would argue more corrupt when it comes down to legacy fossil fuel and what they're vulnerable to being influenced by?
Yeah, this Florida plan is terrible. I mean, we can understand, we can have a debate about, as you've got, so the primary way to finance rooftop solar systems is through something called net metering. And that's where the customer or the owner of the panels on your roof get paid for the value of the energy that your rooftop solar system is producing. And so just as a big natural gas power plant gets paid, you should get paid for the value of the energy that you're producing. Now, of course, if you're a customer of a local utility, and in Florida, the biggest utility is Florida Power and Light, every, kilowatt of electricity that I'm producing on my rooftop is a kilowatt of electricity that the local utility, instead of selling to me, is forced to buy from me, right? That's how the subsidy, it's not really a subsidy. It's how net metering works, is the utility has to buy that value of the solar energy that you're producing from your rooftop. And so what Florida Power and Light is saying is, we're in a death spiral. All of our customers are turning into competitors. We're forced to buy their rooftop solar electricity. We don't like that. We want to keep our customers fixed to our electricity sales. And so they're seeking to end these net metering payments. But if you end those payments, you end the ability of families and small businesses to do the financing needed to install those systems. And you're also depriving people of, robbing them from being compensated for the value of solar that you're producing on your rooftop. So now there is a real issue that if, 30% of a community or 50% of a community all starts to produce solar, for those customers that, don't own their home or are low income or live in multifamily housing, you're going to see a cost shift as the utility payments to the people that have solar are essentially paid by the people without solar.
Right.
But there are very simple modifications and reforms that can be made to build in equity, to make sure we're protecting low-income families. We're providing opportunities for low-income families to participate in the clean energy solution. And you can do that without dismantling net metering. But for the utilities, they just want to use the excuse that they're champions of low income in order to kill net metering for solar.
Yeah.
And we have to remember, these are the same utilities that are disconnecting people at record rates for falling behind on their utility bills during the pandemic.
Exactly. It's such a great point. So as these folks are advocating for what they say are folks that are living in a lower income, paycheck to paycheck, whatever, having their power turned off, that's, you know, they don't mind when they turn the power off, but they use them to make their argument against renewable energies as a result of the way that you just described it. That's a great way of putting it. All right, so let me ask you then about another market, another issue that you've been talking and writing about. You got a press release from Public Citizen about this. And this has to do with, and it gets a little wonky, and I don't want to lose anybody, so I want to be very careful. But we're talking about markets, commodities markets, energy markets, and specifically we're looking at what's going on in the world energy markets as it relates, obviously not specifically to OPEC and oil markets, which people know a little bit about, but more importantly, it seems to natural gas markets, especially what was coming in and out of Russia. So Russia invades Ukraine. It is a huge disruption on world energy markets as we start to boycott what they've got. And now we look at liquid natural gas, which America apparently is the Saudi Arabia of. What infrastructure we have in place and how we're transporting that and what that means and what you're specifically doing. You've written a letter to an agency, a federal agency that regulates commodities, the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, making some suggestions. So first of all, state of natural gas, Tyson, it is bad. It's not good. It burns dirty. It's methane. It has more of an impact initially than some of the other, quote, dirtier energies. You're not supporting natural gas necessarily as a future energy source, a clean energy source, or even a bridge energy source, are you?
No. Natural gas is a huge problem. And, you know, we're all paying the price. You know, inflation is really punishing working families across the United States. Sure. And a lot of the rising prices we're seeing is energy cost inflation being driven by fossil fuel sources like oil and gasoline and natural gas. And that's because at the end of the day, Pete, these are finite commodities. There is so much oil or natural gas in the ground all over planet Earth. And the finite nature of those commodities make them far more susceptible to price volatility in the financial commodity markets. And so it's important for folks to understand that that's how prices are set. Prices are set in these energy trading markets where sometimes there's oil companies in there, sometimes there's end users like large factories or oil refineries. But the vast majority, more than 80% of all the trading is done by financial speculators. And they are using these events that are going on to drive the price up. And so we have to remember that our commodity markets are being stress tested like never before from sort of a triple threat of climate-induced storm activity, because climate change results in more severe and frequent storms. Those storms always disrupt energy prices. You've got the COVID pandemic, which has thrown the energy industry and other industries into a tizzy. And now you've got war in Europe. And what we're seeing is that the market fundamentals are broken.
Right.
Because the markets are dysfunctional and you can't have effective market pricing when the market fundamentals are being broken by all of these different events going on.
Explained differently, but almost the same way. In your letter, you write, commodity markets are perceived to maximize efficiencies for price discovery, allowing producers and end users alike to hedge against price risk. But reliance on these markets during climate change-induced storms and war-related upheaval is testing limits on effective price formation. It's difficult for markets to work efficiently when extreme events render market fundamentals dysfunctional. And even more importantly, it seems, and you write about this, these speculators, these constant investors constantly making bets on the futures to raise the cost artificially more than the market, the economic supply and demand. How am I doing?
Perfect. Especially because you were quoting me from some of that. I couldn't have said it better myself, Pete.
Well, you did.
And so, and a lot of this stuff is also, it's on autopilot, right? You've got these algorithmic or automated traders that's why during some of the recent price upheaval, we saw wild swings in the price of oil go up $30 one day, and then 3 days later, it goes down $40. Was that in response to supply-demand fundamentals? No, it was because a bunch of algorithmic traders put in their programs to respond to tweets from certain news organizations, maybe even Pete Dominick tweets for all I know. And the algorithms buy and sell oil commodities based solely upon some pre-programmed algorithms. And so what happens is the dominance of these algo traders are exacerbating price volatility. And so that was one of several things that we asked federal regulators to look into and to start dealing with. And so it's a very serious issue right now. You know, it's resulting in significant hardship for working Americans, and it's not assisting us in the clean energy transition. When we've got these really high prices, there are some people that are like, well, in the long run, that's going to be good, but it's creating too much disruption for there to be an effective transition. And you can't do a sensible clean energy transition when the poorest among us cannot afford their energy bill. And so that's really the challenge we have, is that for a just transition, an equitable transition, we can't rely on high prices alone to incent us away from fossil fuels and on to renewable energy. We first have to invest in giving families the tools they need to avoid exposure to high gas and oil prices. And for most families, they don't have that yet.
The solutions offered by so many Republicans across the country are just to create more of our energy here at home. And if only Democrats would get out of the way. But the truth is something much different, in that in many ways, Democrats have gotten out of the way and granted permits for drilling, and they're not necessarily even drilling in the places that they have permits to. It really ends up being more about technology and availability. But the fact of the matter is, there's not much standing in the way of American domestic fossil fuel creators that would create so much more American energy that it would affect price, say, at the pump or for the consumer. Or am I missing something?
No, you got it. And here's the thing, Pete. Today, the United States is the world's largest oil producer and the world's largest natural gas producer, right? We're producing almost 12 million barrels of oil every day. The problem is that also every day we're exporting 4 million barrels of crude oil and gasoline every day, right? Because in 2015, Obama negotiated with the Republicans to repeal the 40-year ban on exporting U.S. produced crude oil. So since 2015.
Yep. Such an important point.
So when Republicans say, oh, we need to drill more oil to get energy independence, they're wrong, because drilling more oil is just going to send that oil overseas, and it ties us into the international market, which exacerbates these price increases. Same thing with natural gas, where the U.S. and the EU just negotiated a deal on paper that tries to commit more liquefied natural gas exports to Europe. And look, I want to do everything we can to help the people of Ukraine and the people of Europe, and even the people of Russia that are trapped living in an awful dictatorship. But U.S. LNG is not going to save the day, because we cannot produce enough in a way that is sustainable. Europe doesn't even have adequate LNG import capacity. So they have to build, tens of billions of dollars worth of LNG import terminals. That's going to take years. And right now, LNG destinations are based not upon what the State Department wants, but where the market price is. Right now, the European gas benchmarks are higher than they are in China. As soon as that changes, the LNG exports are going to turn away from Europe and go to Asia. And so as long as we rely on market-based pricing systems for our fossil fuels, we're not going to be able to save Europe from the calamity. It would be much better for us to focus on building electrification, manufacturing electric heat pumps here in the U.S. and supplying them to Europe, making investments in renewable energy. Otherwise, if we promote natural gas, we're just promoting billions of dollars in stranded costs that are going to become irrelevant in the next 10 years.
Who was it that came, I don't know if you supported this, but using the Defense Production Act, which we heard a lot about and learned a lot about during COVID for ventilators and masks and PPE, using that to create those electric pumps that you just mentioned during this time of war, like using the DPA. And you could argue without Russia's invasion, the climate crisis would be reason enough to use the DPA to create things. I mean, certainly the argument is to get it done through legislation, through incentives, through taking incentives off fossil fuels to stop destroying an artificial market. But what about that idea of using the Defense Production Act to fight the climate crisis and the war in Russia, Russia's invasion?
Yeah. Bill McKibben wrote an article saying that that's what we should be doing. And he's absolutely right. Yeah. That it's a way to revitalize the U.S. manufacturing sector, to build heat pumps that can heat and cool your home through electricity so that you're not dependent upon natural gas for that. And so that's what we should be telling our friends in Europe, to say, listen, the only way to solve this crisis is to get off of your gas and oil addiction. And this isn't easy. It's not going to happen overnight, Pete, right? Both Europe and the U.S. We use 20 million barrels of oil a day, right? We're not going to end that tomorrow, but we need to start taking the steps today to build up alternatives to our oil addiction. And so that's definitely got to be part of the solution. But again, going back to, Republicans and saying, well, we need to ramp up oil production. Look at the oil industry today, Pete. Yeah. They have been pulling back on investing more of their capital into increasing production because they want to keep prices high. If they start producing more oil, that's going to flood the market with more barrels, and it's going to end up depressing prices. And what the industry has said is that we don't want to do that. So instead of investing in more oil drilling, they have been investing their money into bigger dividends to attract more investors and more share buybacks to maximize returns for existing shareholders. So that's the real story here, is that it isn't environmental regulations or Biden that is inhibiting greater oil production. It's the industry model. And remember, we're already producing 12 million barrels of oil a day. No other country on earth, the Saudis, the Russians, produce more oil than we do. We are literally number one. And we still are not energy independent, in part because of exports, but in part because we can't. And so we need to understand that the only sustainable path is to start the process of moving towards alternatives. And that's why, the market looks at this and says, we're going to value Tesla as a more valuable company than all of the other automakers, even though it produces a fraction of the automobiles per year. They're producing millions, they're producing 500,000. Why is that? Because Wall Street understands that the future of transport is electrification. Yes. And Tesla knows how to do it. The other automakers are playing catch up. So the markets are looking at this equation and saying, Elon Musk is a little wacky, but he gets it. He understands how this is done, and he understands what the future of transport looks like. And so that's really where we need to continue to accelerate that and to accommodate that by investing in infrastructure, investing in charging infrastructure, investing in electrification of public transit so that we have an equitable transition available to all.
Is public opinion, how much have you seen as you've charted this for a very impressive career that you've had? How much have you seen public opinion change as markets change and as culture changes too? I mean, we can, who knows to what extent we measure the masculinity of your vehicle and the volume of the exhaust and the power that burning fossil fuels give you. And obviously just the feeling that it gets to drink the liberal tears of an electric car. Like, all that has changed as a lot of these electric cars have gotten more popular, from Tesla, you mentioned, to Ford with their pickup trucks and trucks and more manly cars, not to just mention the markets. How much of a change have you seen is there any going back, even if we're not able to successfully combat the climate crisis at this point with technology the way it is, specifically as we're talking to personal vehicles?
Yeah, the big thing, Pete, for people, and this is what I see in the polls, is affordability. And that's where these clean energy technologies are winning, because with wind and solar, I mean, I've given talks to Tea Party groups in Georgia and in Santa Barbara, California, that were like, we want to be able to do more to install rooftop solar because it's the economic thing to do. Sure. We can save money doing it.
Yeah.
With electric vehicles, we're starting to get at a point where we're seeing more affordable vehicles, and those cost curves are only going to continue to decline. So that's going to be the key, is that people are understanding that the transition to a clean energy future isn't just about saving the planet or the moral thing to do. It's also the thing that's going to save you money. When you invest in energy efficiency, when you invest in building electrification, all of these things are being tied more to saving people money. And that's really the key. You know, these other, benefits of saving the planet, these are co-benefits. They're tangential to the primary thing that clean energy, the cost declines are just going to continue to accelerate. And that's what's so exciting, especially having worked on these issues for a couple of decades now. From when I started to getting here today, I would not have been able to predict that renewable energy would be the least cost energy resource in the majority of the United States. That's just an unbelievable statistic. One of the big markets in the middle of the country, it's called Southwest Power Pool, or SPP. Just the other day, 90% of the electricity in this huge multi-state electric market, 90% came from renewable energy, right? And the light stayed on. There was no reliability issues. That's just going to become more and more the norm as we deploy more. But there are still impediments. We've got Neanderthal states, like the government in Florida, that are trying to erect artificial barriers to these beneficial technologies. And the question is, do we have the political will to overcome that and to embrace these technologies? And that's going to be the key.
I'll let you go, but is there any cool new technology you want to tell us about? Anything you're watching, anything you've been impressed by, anything that you think really is the future? Where are my solar roads? What happened to my solar roadways I interviewed these people that was like their whole idea. I vetted them and everything, and they were like, yeah, the future is solar panel covered roads. And I never saw one. That was like 12 years ago. I don't know if that worked out.
I think the problem is there's a lot of wear and tear in roads, and they need fixing from time to time. And so I think that there are replacement costs that start to get in the way. But for me, it's energy storage. I mean, like I said, looking at the replacement for lithium ion batteries, which, have some faults in that they can overheat, but there are a bunch of emerging technologies that look like they're far more efficient and far safer and going to be at a lower price point. So I think energy storage is really the big area where we're going to see some significant gains in the next couple of years. And again, that's going to be the holy grail. Once, the costs have been going down for lithium ion batteries significantly, but if we've got an even cheaper way to store energy, then that's really going to be it. I mean, really at its core, Elon Musk and Tesla, it's just an energy storage company that comes with four wheels.
Right, it's a battery company.
That's really what he's producing, right? The cars are special, but it's really the energy storage capacity that is the incredible thing. And applying that across the board to back up your house, to back up our communities, that's really going to be where the next big market is going to be.
So great catching up with you. Thank you for all of the work that you've been doing, your whole career, and all of the folks at Public Citizen. Citizen.org, Tyson Slocum, all the links are in the show notes. So great to catch up with you, man. Thank you so much for your time today.
Pete, I had a blast. Look forward to the next time.
All right, there he goes. Public Citizen, citizen.org. That is Tyson Slocum, at Tyson Slocum. I learned a lot from that conversation. I hope that you did as well. Thank you, Tyson, for joining me. I'll get him back soon. If you've got questions for guests like him or suggestions of guests like him, send them my way. standupwithpete@gmail.com. And now it's time to get to one of my all-time faves. She is a woman who I've really gotten to know well over the pandemic. She's joined me many times here on the show. She's an expert in American politics, black ethnic politics, urban politics, quantitative methods, and public opinion. She's an associate professor of political science at Fordham University. She's the author of Black Ethnics, Race, Immigration, and the Pursuit of the American Dream. She's working on a new book. She's also the host and producer of The Aftermath with Christina Greer, and she's on Twitter at @dr_CM Greer, @dr_CM Greer. Ladies and gentlemen, let's get it started with Chrissy Greer. Dr. Christina Greer, to you.
I want to ask you a big question first, which is a kind of about general politics, and that is, do you think in the national scene, you cover New York, obviously, but you can talk about anything, anytime. Do you think that maybe the Republicans have gone too far with their culture war stuff, their race stuff, their women's reproduction stuff, their anti-gay stuff? Do you think they've gone too far that somehow Democrats won't lose as much as almost every analyst is predicting they will nationally?
Okay, I need to unpack that question because for me personally, yes, they've obviously gone too far because public opinion says that the vast majority of Americans support marriage equity. The vast majority of Americans actually do believe in a woman's right to choose. The vast majority of Americans actually want their kids to have some sort of understanding of the world so that they're not these myopic dodo birds. However, the way Republicans have gerrymandered the states in such a way that it doesn't matter if public opinion leans more to the left, we're structured so that Republicans have a disproportionate advantage. They don't actually represent the nation and the changing composition of the nation. But in state houses across the country, in Congress, the way we have the structure of the Senate, where there are, 2 senators for Rhode Island and there are 2 senators for the state of California, we see that Republicans have a disproportionate level of power compared to the way most Americans, or at least over 55% of Americans, think about these issues.
Yeah, that's a great point. The gerrymandered district. So it doesn't necessarily matter if they've gone too far, but I wonder if they've gone too far even for certain red districts. You remember those days back when you would make a certain comment, certainly Republicans would, and they'd be like, "Whoa, too far! You're not a witch." What's her name?
But we're not there anymore,
right,
because with. And it's not just Donald Trump, but it's what he was able to excavate. And I would say, we can go back to Sarah Palin, we can go back to Ronald Reagan. But, Sarah Palin and the Tea Party began to sort of have this right-wing fringe say and do things that sort of normal, good, God-fearing Republicans would never sort of say out loud. There's a level of decorum and respect for the nation. And then it was just like, with the Tea Party, it's like, no, we can just have full-on front-faced lies, say it's the truth, keep repeating it, and then folks will fall in line. And then we saw a president who did that for 4 years. And now we have people who are just like, yeah, the president says things that I like, meaning Donald Trump. And I'm not saying that, all Republicans are racist. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that you are more than comfortable cozying up to, following, and voting for racists consistently. So when you have Republican senators who can say Ketanji Brown Jackson's the most qualified, senator or judicial court nominee we've seen in our lifetime, and still I'm not going to vote for her because she's radical. But you voted for Lindsey Graham last year.
The argument, I'm glad you brought her up because I wanted to get your take on that specific thing. The Republicans' excuses for not voting for her. And I think somebody said, well, yeah, I voted for her for different courts, but those weren't lifetime tenures. This is a lifetime tenure. So now I have issue with her philosophy.
Right. And we can look at all the judges that Donald Trump put in across the country. These are people who didn't pass the bar. They barely passed their, 5th tier law schools. They're, radicals of the most extreme. We can look at Amy Coney Barrett, who couldn't even list the 5 freedoms.
Yeah.
You want to put her on the court for a lifetime, right?
Yeah.
We can look at Brett Kavanaugh, who's doing the shaking, crying abuser, talking about beer and drunkenness, and is, credibly accused of sexual assault. Sure. Okay. But
we can look at all the people that he nominated even before them, which no one told him were either dead or cartoon villains. He was like, how about Gargamel? And they're like, sir, he's not real. Right. He's like, that's a shame because I would have appointed him.
I mean, you think about like all the anti-Semitism that the president said, the former president, and then he would say, well, my son-in-law is Jewish, right? I mean, that's the equivalent of, you using the N-word. It's like, but Chrissy's my friend. It's like, and what's that got to do with anything, right? I mean, the mental gymnastics that Republicans have been able to put themselves through to justify the racism, sexism, homophobia, anti-Semitism, anti-Muslim sentiments, et cetera, since that man came down that gold-plated escalator and called Mexicans rapists, it is really stunning and it's disgusting because we see this anti-intellectualism. We see them just lying, right? I mean, they'll live and die on a lie and support those who do so, which, I'm not saying that, the Reagan Republicans were, these beacons of hope, but we never had, when you look at sort of votes for, say, Planned Parenthood or even former justices, you never had Republicans just saying, I'm not going to vote for someone purely because they're a Democrat. I'm not even going to think about their record. I'm not going to participate. It's just, if the Democrats want it, it's a no. We haven't seen that with legislation. This is now an obstructionist government, which, going back to your original question, actually could hurt Democrats because you have Democrats feeling like, well, nothing's getting done and we've got unified government. So what are these people doing in Washington, D.C.? And we know the Democrats don't turn out in midterms at high rates.
That's for sure.
The way Republicans do. So November's a danger zone for sure. And I think a lot of Republicans are just waiting for them to officially gain one of the houses so that everything in the next 2 years, the last 2 years of the Biden administration, will just be a hell no.
On Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson, we covered kind of the Republican reactions, is what you're just saying. But I saw this, and I was looking through your Twitter timeline, and you tweeted someone had written an opinion piece, I think, at the Washington Post about this, and I wanted to ask you about it. Cory Booker was great when he was recognizing her and the joy and all that. I thought that was great. During an interview after the confirmation hearings, I forget which network, asked him, did he think, like, basically, were Republicans being racist towards her? And he kind of hedged and he didn't say it. Now, politicians have sometimes a hard time, and people have a hard time calling something racist or calling out racism because it might alienate someone and you need to work with them to get something done and you don't want to lose them. But I felt I was like, I don't know. What do we do in this case? To me, that was all kinds of racism that was being directed her way by a lot of these Republican senators, whether it was on whatever you want to call it. But I feel like Booker kind of hedged on that, and you shared an opinion on that. And I wonder how we handle that and what you thought of his point there.
Right. Well, Cory Booker's never going to be the one who says something's racist. That's just A, not his bag. And B, as a U.S. sitting senator, I think he probably looked at, sort of the long road.
Right.
If he said that, then that would be the takeaway. Nothing else that he said before or after that. It was just Cory Booker thinks Republicans are racist, period. Right. And let's also remember, good Democrats don't even like the R word. So that doesn't serve him in any capacity. Is it racism? Hell yeah. I got 2 eyes and 2 ears, and a brain. I saw it. But I think from where he's sitting, he doesn't like to call it like that. And that's just also not his personality style.
What was racist? What was racism?
Because this woman, when you look at her resume, when you look at her experience, when you look at how she's been able to answer these questions, and then you could compare her to, I don't know, let's just say the 2 data points within the past 3 years of Brett Kavanaugh and Amy Coney Barrett and the softball questions they received and how they were unable to even answer softball questions.
Yeah.
How they do not understand how to interpret the will of the Constitution or the law. How we saw essentially the Ted Cruz's of the Republican Party just go in. It's like, I don't like her, and I'm going to try and pull out, a children's book. Show me where racism is. I mean, it's just Ted Cruz. Do your job, right? Lindsey Graham, I don't know what Donald Trump had you, but he's got something good. But the fact that Lindsey Graham can just on a dime just say, no, she's too radical. How? What has she done in 1 year, right? And so also letting the QAnon faction of the party dictate the questioning and how she just handled that so adeptly.
What was that part of it racist? Just because they went so cheap and so strategically undignifying to her? Is that sexist?
That part, this idea that she's radical now is
right.
The word for colored, right? I mean, you're radical. It's like, oh, you remember Obama was radical. I'm like, Obama's one of our most moderate presidents we've seen in modern day history.
And now they're
right? So it's like his skin color's radical for a lot of folks, but he's not radical.
The one comment or questioning that seemed to be so starkly ignorant and bigoted and racist was Marsha Blackburn saying to Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson, basically, I think she even insinuated it, you have a secret plan to institute critical race theory. That was racist because she was saying that because it's a black woman, because of course, Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson has never talked about.
As she said, I've never litigated that.
Right.
Like I have never, that is not in my wheelhouse. We didn't ask Brett Kavanaugh that. We didn't ask Amy Coney Barrett that.
Right.
And I will say this, and I've noticed this since we started talking about this. You pronounce her name correctly. That inability and unwillingness to pronounce a name that literally goes consonant, vowel, consonant, vowel, consonant, vowel. And white people who refuse. There's a whole compilation online that Trevor Noah put together.
Yeah, I saw. I played it. I played it here on the show. Yeah,
folks who refuse to pronounce. We can say Shostakovich. We can say Rob Gronkowski. We can say Tchaikovsky. Right? We can say all the names. Hey, we can say Giannis.
No, well, listen, I can't allow you to continue because twice at least, I caught once and I edited it. I did say Jackson Brown, but I think that's more about the artist and it was getting stuck in my brain. But
Fine. But you know how to say Ketanji. Why? Because it's spelled Ketanji. Oh, it is phonics, people. Yeah. Like it is literally the easiest word to pronounce because it goes consonant, vowel, consonant, vowel. It's not that deep, right? But we can pronounce names that have T's, C's, H's, K's, Y's, and like no vowels. And all of a sudden it's like, well, that's easy. So like that to me is racist. The fact that because having gone to school with white people my entire life and having a name like Christina Greer, but then also, you know, seeing my friends who don't have sort of, I would call, say, Anglo names, right? And consistently hearing teachers like, oh, I wish you just had an easier name. Yeah. Hey, you know what? I'm just going to call you Pete instead of, you know, whatever your proper name is. It's like, that is not your name. And so as a professor, I mean, the first day of class, I will literally, it's like, hey, I don't care if you all feel uncomfortable. I'm going to sit here and get your name correct because we're about to be together for a semester and your parents named you something for a reason. And if I can't get it on the first try, that's on me. I can't stand when students are like, well, that's fine. You can just call me whatever. It's like a level of disrespect that is so deep in this country. It enrages me to a certain level, as you can see.
Yeah, no, I like the way you broke it down linguistically too. I never even thought about it. Let's move on from the, well, I mean, she's not been confirmed yet. What does it mean to you?
It's looking good, but you know, as my dad says, there's a lot of slip between cup and lip. So I'll wait until these votes are in. But, you know, Collins coming through as she tends to do certain things. You know, the fact that, you know, Joe Manchin's a yes and everyone's like, yay, Joe Manchin. I'm like, leave the party and leave us alone.
Right.
He's the Will and Jada Smith of the Democratic Party. Just leave us alone. I'm tired of thinking about you all.
Wow. You just compared Will and Jada to Joe Manchin. Speaking of your dad, you tweeted something funny a week or so ago. You said this is about this Philly-based school, Philly's school-based nonprofit pushing black and brown girls to pursue passions in science, technology, engineering, and math, or STEM. And you tweeted around that. You wrote, from a very early age, my father told my sister and me that we were predisposed to be good at math because, quote, Greers have a math gene. I believed him, and I always did well in math because I thought it was genetic. It wasn't until AP Calculus when I realized there was no such thing. Why?
There's no math gene. I really thought I had a math gene.
So is that, my dad did something similar, but he always supported my dreams, but he did tell me what we didn't do. He said, Dominics aren't good at basketball and we don't play golf.
Oh, my dad hates golf. He's like, oh, it's too slow. Because, you know, I would just assume that my dad played golf. He played tennis back in the day before he popped his Achilles heel. But so growing up, I mean, my dad had 2 girls, right? And he was adamant. I mean, from as long as I can remember, she's like, we are predisposed to be good at math. Because, you know, girls were always told that they're not good at math. You know, my generation, especially black people, are told that they're not good at math. Lots of people just, quote unquote, hate math. I always ask kids, I'm like, what's your favorite subject? When they say math, I'm like overjoyed. But he always said, he's like, yeah, we're we're good at math. Our last name is Greer. That's just, we're predisposed. It's in our genes to be good at it. So I literally thought that mathematics was something like to be predisposed that, some people are really good at languages or art or basketball genetically. I thought that we were just genetic. So if I couldn't get a problem in math, it's like, oh no, I have to get it because I'm basically like a superhero when it comes to math. And then there was this story about my grandfather tutoring my grandmother in math. They went to Roger Williams, and then they both went to Tennessee State. And so my grandfather was my grandmother's tutor. They were in class together at some small Black school. And my grandmother kept getting better scores on her exams than my grandfather. And they weren't dating. He was just helping her out. And finally, he was like, wait, I don't understand how, I'm tutoring you, but you're getting better grades. And she's like, honey, I don't need a math tutor. That was just her ruse to sort of kick it with my grandfather. So then it was then that story was your grandmother was better than your grandfather at math, and your grandfather was great at math. So now you're doubly good at math. So that was just how we were raised. And I did not realize that until AP Calculus.
Is it true that when you were growing up, there was a girl who looked just a little bit like you in class, but was also really good at math? And you were like, we must be related.
Right. Unfortunately, because I went to all white schools, it was oftentimes only me in the honors.
So that never happened then. Okay, well, there goes that improv.
Right. Because, Black kids get tracked out of certain classes.
And still, right? I mean, it's a gender thing as well. So there's a lot there. Speaking of, let me ask you one Black woman question.
But as an aside, though, in my honors geometry class, when I first moved to Illinois in 10th grade, so I did 9th grade in Philly, and then 10th grade, I'm the new girl. There's this, I don't really talk to anybody from my high school because it was in the middle of nowhere in suburbs of Illinois, like an hour and change north of Chicago and right near the Wisconsin border. But there was a white boy in my class who sat in front of me. His name's Kevin Fall. He is still my ace to this day.
Really?
In honors. And we met in honors geometry class.
Your ace meaning?
Talk to him every first of the month. We do rabbit. And he's my one friend that I still talk to on a regular basis. And he dropped out of high school. He was just super smart and was bored and got his GED and got his associates and then went to college and MBA. So when I was graduating from undergrad, he was graduating with an MBA.
I don't know what rabbit is.
Rabbit is, it's weird. It's not an East Coast thing because not everybody on the East Coast says it. It's just you say it on the first day of the month. It's the first thing you're supposed to say. It brings you good luck for the month. Those who know. And so you send it to other people who believe in it. You just send rabbit early in the morning on the first of every month.
Saying rabbit or white rabbit, I'm reading another phrase, will bring good luck to those who say it on the first of a new month.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
So we texted on April 1st because it was the first of the month.
I love that. So I want to tie all this kind of together and to ask you, all this, meaning the Will Smith, Jada Pinkett, Chris Rock thing, and Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson, because a lot of people obviously were trying to tie a lot of things together. And there was a lot of protect Black women during Ketanji Brown Jackson's testifying, and there's a lot of that, and there always has been. I like that. I think it's interesting. I think it's enlightening to see that conversation, to hear that conversation, understand what it means. And in this case, there was a lot of people saying, how can we say protect Black women when you're criticizing Will Smith for doing just that? And then the reaction to that was that was very kind of sexist. But I just wanted you to weigh in on those that were using that phrase as it applied to what happened with Chris Rock and Will Smith and Jada Pinkett Smith.
Yeah, I don't see them as comparable at all. When we say protect Black women in the Ketanji Brown Jackson case, it's this is a hyper-qualified woman who has been hyper-qualified from very, very early in her life and career. And so it's support her in one of the highest honors that anyone can be, nominated and voted on for. So that, to me, is the protect Black women. Let's rally around this woman who has the qualifications. Not just because she's a Black woman, but because she deserves to be there. And it's obviously historic. I think there's a debate as to whether or not Joe Biden should have led with the fact that it's historic and she's a Black woman. Obviously, he has to say that. But, I would have preferred, honestly, he lead with her. As I said before, her list of accomplishments is longer than a CVS receipt. like lead with that. And then it's like, and also we have an opportunity to make history. He said, we have an opportunity to make history. Let me show you this hyper qualified woman. PR wise, I would have preferred he say, look at this crazy hyper qualified woman. Like, look at all of this stuff. And PS, we can make some history. That's just that piece. I don't see any through line between Ketanji Brown Jackson and Will and Jada. I don't. I just, I was the person who was about to sign that petition a few months ago that someone started that was like, hey guys, stop talking about your sex life. Leave us alone. We don't care what's going on in your marriage.
With the two of them?
Yes. And I just, I'm of the men that I've dated in my life, I have never one who prefers a man use any sort of physical violence to, quote unquote, stick up for me or anyone around me. It's like, I date intellectuals. So it's like, use your words. So, I have a lot of thoughts on that whole night where it's just like, I think it's a little bit of self-sabotage. We've seen people do it before. It's like, well, this is something you've worked 30 years for. Everyone told you tonight is your night. Why are you choosing this night to be offended? Right? We all know you wouldn't have slept, white man. So like, dude, work out whatever you're working out. I haven't read his autobiography, but I know that there's, been some abuse in his home. Yeah. And so like everything sort of came to a head. Yeah, it seems like maybe they need a timeout. I'm no marriage therapist, but like maybe y'all need to separate for a second because it's like he's got sad eyes, like I'm a human being. So I know when people have sad eyes, it's like he has sad eyes. And that's something that, all the awards in the world can't fix. Like something's wrong on the inside and at home. So work on that. But I don't see that protect Black women because it wasn't protecting Black women. And that speech was nonsense. And if I were the Williams sisters, I'd be pissed as hell that you're bringing my dad. Keep my daddy's name out your MF mouth, right? Like, don't conflate that. So you weren't protecting Black women. And the whole, pay equity thing that he said that he fought for, he actually didn't. The women fought for that. And he was like, oh, okay, sure, I'll co-sign it. But like, he didn't fight for that. So that to me is not a protect Black women conversation at all. And like, let's also be clear, Chris Rock didn't write the damn joke. Like, so you're sort of going after the wrong messenger, and you take away from the night that Black people produced that night, Will Packer et al. And 2 Black women were co-hosts that night. So like, you want to protect Black women, think about the whole ecosystem of Black women. And not just this woman, sitting next to you who clearly isn't protecting you. So she's telling us about how she's unhappy in her sex life and she's having sex with some man in the house that you paid for. So leave us out. I'm tired of it.
The way you framed it. Yeah, no, well, listen, I knew you would say some version of what you said about all of this, but I wanted to hear exactly what you would say and how you'd frame it. So I appreciate you indulging me for one more week on that question, which I do think it is an important conversation to have. And I really appreciate
it is. And you're right. But I think, honestly, a lot of that conversation needs to be had in-house.
Sure. Yeah, it's like, personal.
Amongst them, but also like amongst Black people, because obviously, there are a lot of Black people who disagree with me. There's, he's also at work, and there's a way that like Black people have to behave at work that's very complicated. Like very rarely can you be your full self at work. And then to have and they are at work. I mean, they are literally with every colleague, past, present, and future at work. This is the highest sort of work event that you can go to. And you choose that opportunity to have a physical altercation with another Black man.
Right.
Like, and so, yeah, I do lean probably more to the side of politics of respectability than some Black people would prefer. But like, it's just frustrating. And it's, and I'm trying to, that's why I'm in therapy. It's like, I try to lean on compassion. I'm working on it. So the compassionate side of me says, hey, this man is hurting like on a whole host of levels because you just ruined the best night of your life.
Do you do the the compassionate meditation where you put someone that you really despise in your thoughts? Do you do that?
I have done that before.
I don't like that. I do it, but I don't like it.
But you know what's so interesting?
It works
if I choose a particular person, oftentimes it doesn't work with that person. Yeah. It triggers something for a different person.
Oh, that's interesting.
Loop around. So like, person X is like the intention I set, but I'll end up sort of finding out something about person Y on the inside that then causes me to have compassion. But you know who I did that for a lot? to help me stay sane was Donald Trump.
Yeah, I struggle with the putting the people who I don't personally know or have had interaction with in, because obviously Trump, certain celebrity, but I like to think about the guy I had the altercation with at the convenience store because he was not wearing a mask and attacking some woman, and or a argument I had with my dad or my wife, or I like to take the people that I had negative thoughts towards for whatever reason, because when I put in Eric and Don Jr., it's just different.
Right. And most of the time I do people that I know, but for 4 years, every now and again, I would have to do the president because I was like, first of all, this man is still in charge of my life in some capacity.
Yes.
And he's so filled with pain, such pain.
Yeah.
And such hurt. And he's inflicting it on all of us. And he's been waiting to do so his entire life. Right. And so it's I do believe in energy and sort of, changing the course of the universe and all that stuff. So I was like, let me at least try, because he's had so much vitriol directed at him from a very early age. That's the only thing he knows how to redirect.
I wanted to ask you where you were and how you're thinking personally and from maybe a policy standpoint on COVID.
Oh, it's funny. I'm writing an op-ed about it right now.
Oh, good.
It ain't over, people. My goodness. I just, folks are still dying at I know it's not the same rates as, March 2020 or April 2020, but I think a lot of people are over COVID. It's but COVID's not over us. So, Fordham now has an optional mask mandate. This is where I teach full time. And I framed it as a collective action conversation with the class. Because technically I can't make them wear a mask anymore because the school says that they don't have to. But I just, sort of, it's an intro to politics class. And I was like, hey, listen, we don't know.
Interesting.
I was like, we don't know who lives with whom. I have quite a few commuter students and a lot of students who are in dorms. I was like, we don't know by looking at one another who's immunocompromised. We have no idea. And Fordham students have to be vaccinated, but some people get religious exemptions or whatever it may be. I was like, we assume that everyone in this room is vaccinated, but we don't know that for a fact. I haven't taken a poll. That's not my job as your professor. I was like, but I've taught you about collective action. I've taught you about free riders. I've taught you about tragedy of the commons, right? I've taught you about a prisoner's dilemma. So let's frame this mask conversation as such. And I think that we should keep our masks on. And every single student was like, agreed.
Interesting. Very interesting. Or maybe they just wanted to kiss the professor's ass and get the right grade.
I don't care.
Who wants
But we're in a room with no windows and no ventilation in a building that is built in the 1960s.
After that whole presentation and all the different philosophical...
But I mean, it's funny, though, because that same class, we were learning about data and how you can ask leading questions.
Sure.
So it's do you think Pete Dominick is the greatest comedian to ever walk the face of the earth? Agree, disagree, right? Or is Pete Dominick a comedian you would listen to? How we can ask a question.
Did you ask, is Pete Dominick on his way down? Because I think that would be an interesting.
I'll be sure to ask them that. I see them again tomorrow. They're great. But, it's sort of, let's not be penny wise and pound foolish, people. Americans are impatient. And so we just want to be footloose and fancy free. And it's this is how we have to keep going back underground, right? If we would just do what we're supposed to do, then maybe we can fully get on the other side of this. But folks don't want to do this. And let's just be 100. Most white people have never been told what to do. This is why, everyone's I don't understand why when, you see people of color wearing masks and you don't see white people wearing masks, on the subway, in the airport, it's white men are the ones, it's sir, please put on your mask. Or they're wearing it, with the nose out. I'm it's been 2 years plus, put your nose in, and put the mask on. But I think a lot of people just, they're obstinate. It's you can't tell me what to do. Whereas people of color are used to the state constantly interfering with their lives and being told what they can and cannot do.
Is your op-ed mostly about the mask part of it? Is it about a larger behavior?
It's about remembering that even though you may be fine and you may feel like we're beyond it, please think of your community. It's not an individual decision that you make. And so when you have an opportunity to mask up or get vaccinated and boosted, please do so, because there might be people who are unable to do so. I mean, I have colleagues, many of whom have kids under the age of 5 in their homes.
Right.
who aren't vaccinated.
Right.
So, they're saying it's like, I live with unvaccinated people, not because they're anti-vaxxers, because they can't get a vaccination just yet. And like, nobody wants their 3-year-old to have freaking COVID. Like, that's kind of scary.
I wanted to ask you one more political question here at the end, because we're hearing a lot of talk about the economy and how it's being perceived politically for incumbents, but specifically for the Democratic president and Democrats in office. The argument is Democrats are terrible at selling their accomplishments. Yep. Look at these economic numbers. Month after month, millions of jobs have been created under Biden in under 2 years, and millions were lost under Trump. We can dig into the nitty gritty as to why that is. Obviously, COVID crushed Trump and his administration. But more importantly, the question now is, does this damage Biden and Democrats? Then one of the arguments is, boy, the way that this gets covered by the media is preposterous. And finally, of course, there is a different issue this time is while, the economy is returning and jobs are returning and job numbers are breaking records, things cost more because of all the COVID related and now Russian war energy related inflation. How do you process it? Is it Democrats' fault? Are they not selling it well enough? Is it the public perception that just doesn't get it? What do you how does this play out, Christina?
Yeah, I always feel like the Democrats are just so bad at marketing their ideas. Like Republicans will just like say a lie and just keep repeating it. And it's like, boom, that's the marketing. Democrats, they're the ones who continuously build the social safety net. They're the ones who are like, listen, I'm trying to make sure that you and your families don't fall off a financial cliff. But then they won't tell you what they've done. You remember the American Rediscovery Back to Work Act? I'm like, Obama, like you have literally saved this country from falling off the cliff and dragging the rest of the world with it. And nobody knows what to call it. And like, you never bothered to like walk us through all the ways. See,
I have a different recollection. Either I think he did, and I remember Republicans blocking them from buying billboards saying that this was paid for by, much less, how much can the bully pulpit, how much can they message? And someone made an argument yesterday that Trump, for all his tweets, all the evil, he was a show. He was constantly doing a show, letting you know what he thinks and what he does. And like that, for better or for worse, recreated the way that politics should be. And now we're just ignoring things and not realizing. So what could Democrats possibly do better of to tout their accomplishments, I guess?
Then use surrogates. Use the local and state government officials and folks to do it. Use your celebrities. Figure out where people are. Let community members and community leaders know this, right? Convene the doggone pastors if you have to. Like, whoever has the bully pulpit, because it's clearly not Robinette Biden. So figure out who has the ear of the folks and let them know what you were doing. Like, walk us through it.
So what you're saying is they should reach out to Chris Rock because everybody is desperate to hear what he says. And the first thing he should say is,
pay this man $1 billion to walk us through this
Joe
financial.
Biden has created more jobs.
Yes. And explain how inflation works. Explain how we've had this slow pipeline globally, right? And this is why your packages are late. This is why you go to the grocery store and you spend $50 and you barely have one bag of groceries. Like why gas is so expensive. All of these things. Walk us through it. Because right now, Democrats are going to go to the polls in November. And what Republicans are going to say is your gas is high. Your groceries are expensive. There have been no jobs created. Jobs have been lost. Just lies, right, on the latter part. And then no context as to why it is that certain economic mishaps have happened. They will not explain how Republicans gave themselves and their rich friends these tax breaks for 4 years under Donald Trump. They will not explain how the Democrats are trying to rebuild a social safety net in the midst of COVID when people have not been able to go back to work. And a lot of people are having, a moment of agnoresis or whatever you want to call it, where they're like, you know what? I'm tired of working for this BS job, BS wages, and I'm staying my ass at home and being safe. And the government can pay me to do that. So what about it? And, I can't say I'm mad at them. I'm about to pay a truckload of taxes, but I believe in the social safety net and I believe in paying into it. So, hey, Republicans, pay your fair share of taxes. Maybe we'd have some money.
Finally, I wanted to just ask you what this season means to you and how you might have evolved with the season of spring. You have been tweeting. We always talk nature on and off the air. We share pictures. You've been tweeting lately about birds and birding. We can talk about that. But is there anything more deeper in terms of how it affects you or that you could share with me as a lesson? What does spring do? And are you at a stage. I hate to complain about the weather and I love winter, but I'm ready for the cold to end. I need some sun. I need it very badly. So where are you and how what
Yeah, so one, I just treated myself to a new pair of binoculars. I'm super jazzed.
Oh, yeah.
Two, my niece is going to college in California. And we were talking about, she's very excited, and we're a very East Coast family. We're a very Northeast college family in the sense that most of the people in our family go to college in Boston. That's just what we've done, and that's kind of who we are. And my niece has decided to break that trend and go west. And that's just not something that we've done as a collective. And so she's super excited, and I'm obviously very excited for her. But we had a conversation last week where I was saying, I can't see her coming back east. She does not like the cold. And she does not like the snow. And so I was saying that I actually need to live in the Northeast because I really need seasons that change.
Yeah.
I need 4 seasons. Like, I need to look forward to spring and like the budding of, tulips coming out of the ground. I like the heat of summer, and then it's like, oh, it's oppressive. Oh, great. So now I get to see the leaves change, right? And then sort of as the leaves fall off the trees and the cold comes, and it's like it's winter, and it's kind of reflective and hibernation and sort of quiet and slower. And then all of a sudden, rejuvenation and buds come again.
Yeah.
And you can hear new birds as they come back north, and, new sounds in the morning. And so it's like the cycle of life helps me just recognize my own cycle of life. Because I have so many, like my school year starts basically August, September. So that's kind of one new beginning. Then there's January, which is an official new beginning. And then I have my 4 seasons, which are a new beginning. And then I have my birthday, which is in July. And that to me is also a new beginning. So there are always these opportunities for me to like reset. And then, I give up alcohol for Lent.
Do you, wait, you always give up alcohol every year?
The past like 6 or 7 years. Yeah.
So that's about how long does Lent last?
46 days. I don't cheat. I don't do the Sunday. You can, have a cheat day. I just do all 46 days. And I drink on Easter.
What does that do for you?
It's just a way to sort of check in with myself. I'm in an occupation where drinking is very easy and encouraged. And because we spend a lot of time alone and working from home, even pre-COVID, is very easy to, have a quick beer in the afternoon or, just drink kind of consistently. And so I've had a few friends as we've gotten older who have definitely had to go to facilities to deal with their alcoholism. And I don't want to ever have to go that route. So I like to just check in. So I have sober September. Most people do sober October, but September is the beginning of my school year. And it's like, you know what? This is the time where I'm like, I need a drink. And so it's like, this is the time where I should not be drinking if I feel like I need a drink.
Your discipline is impressive.
I have to have, academics have to have discipline because, no one's breathing down our neck to get anything done besides teaching. Research is all on us.
Well, I can certainly relate to that as a podcaster who lives in a shed.
Right. But you have a dog, so
hey, boss, I'll be right there.
Right
here.
Right. As an academic, especially someone who's tenured, no one's really asking for stuff. So I have to have the discipline to create deadlines and demand stuff of myself.
I always learn from you. I appreciate you and your time and your wisdom. It's been too long, and I'm so happy that we got to catch up. Thank you very much, Chrissy.
I'm excited to see it, even if it's only on StreamYard.
Streamline. And there she goes, Dr. Christina Greer, everybody, at Fordham University at Dr_CM Greer. Let her know you heard her here. Greer, here. I did it again. All right, well, that's it. That's all I've got for you. Thanks so much for joining me today on the podcast. Tell your friends, give a review on Spotify, iTunes, subscribe on YouTube, youtube.com/standupwithpete. If you subscribe to YouTube channels, go subscribe to that one, please, youtube.com/standupwithpete. And if you aren't signed up for a paid subscription yet, do that now, standupwithpete.com, patreon.com/Pete Dominic. John Carroll, singer-songwriter, our own Grammy-nominated and winning artist, former founding member of the Starland vocal band, John Carroll, would Stand Up.
Stand up. I think you're driving wheels and leaking grease. boy, you better stand up. Stand up. Well, there's a whole lot more of us who know what's right. They'll keep right on ignoring us if we keep sitting tight. You got to open up the window to let in some light. You gotta stand up. That's right. You got to rise up. You got to stand up. You got to stare the devil straight in the eye. We got to let him know it's his turn to go. See it clear when all you hear is a lie. Don't get up off of your butt, get down off of your fence. Even if it ain't a very friendly audience, well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense. And you stand up, stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town. Just stand up, stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down. Boy, you better stand up, stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. She's the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up, stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up, they had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right, we got to speak up. We got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up. You got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well, and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up.